What happens when one of country music's most beloved icons sits down for what should be a simple interview, only to find herself face to face with a host who seems determined to tear her down? In just 33 seconds, Jon Stewart's smug dismissal of Reba McEntire's career would ignite a firestorm that no one saw coming. This wasn't just an awkward moment. This was a complete breakdown of respect, civility, and basic decency on live television. The studio audience settled into their seats, buzzing with excitement. The energy was electric. People had been lining up outside for hours just to get a chance to see this taping. Reba McEntire was tonight's guest, and everyone expected the usual charming banter, some laughs, maybe a story or two about life on the road. Maybe she would talk about her latest album, or her upcoming tour dates, or that new television project everyone had been hearing about. The anticipation was palpable. The lights dimmed, the band kicked into the show's theme song, and Jon Stewart walked out with that confident stride he always had. The audience jumped to their feet, clapping and cheering. Stewart waved, smiled, soaked it all in. He loved this part, the adoration, the attention, the feeling of being the smartest person in the room. But if you look closely, if you really paid attention, there was something different in his eyes tonight. Something sharp, something that suggested he wasn't in the mood for a typical softball interview. He had something on his mind, and he was going to make sure everyone heard it. Then came the introduction. The band shifted into a gentle, twangy melody, a nod to Reba's musical roots. The audience perked up even more. They knew who was coming. Reba walked onto the stage wearing a beautiful black blazer with subtle silver detailing, perfectly tailored to her frame. Her red hair was perfectly styled, cascading over her shoulders in soft waves. Her smile was warm and genuine, the kind of smile that made people feel instantly at ease. She waved to the crowd, and they absolutely loved her. The energy shifted completely. This wasn't just any guest. This was royalty in the world of country music. You could feel the admiration radiating from every corner of the studio. These people respected her. They loved her music, her story, everything she represented. This was a woman who had earned every bit of success she had, who had worked harder than most people could imagine, who had overcome obstacles and setbacks and criticism to become one of the biggest names in American music, and everyone in that room knew it. Stewart gestured to the chair beside his desk with an exaggerated sweep of his arm. Reba sat down gracefully, crossing her legs at the ankle, still smiling, still gracious. She had done hundreds of these interviews, thousands even. She knew how to handle herself. "Reba McEntire, everyone," Stewart said, and the audience clapped again, louder this time. She nodded, thanking them. With a small wave, her eyes sparkled under the studio lights. "Thank you so much for having me," Reba said warmly. Stewart leaned back in his chair, putting his hands behind his head in a posture that screamed casual superiority. "So, Reba," he began, his tone already carrying a hint of something that wasn't quite friendly. "You've been doing this country music thing for, what, a really long time now? How many years has it been?" The audience laughed nervously. It was a strange way to phrase the question. This country music thing? Like it was some hobby she picked up on a whim. Like it wasn't the foundation of an incredible career that had spanned decades. But Reba, ever the professional, just smiled and took it in stride. "Yes, I have," she said sweetly, her Oklahoma accent coming through just slightly. "It's been quite a journey, over 40 years now. Started when I was pretty young, actually." Stewart nodded slowly, like he was thinking about something much more important than what she was saying. His expression was almost smug. 40 years. Wow, that's a lot of years. A lot of years singing about trucks and beer, and what else do you guys sing about? Dogs? Dirt roads? The studio fell quiet. Not the good kind of quiet either. It was the uncomfortable, awkward kind of quiet that makes everyone shift in their seats and wonder what's about to happen. A few people in the audience exchanged glances. Some looked confused. Others looked concerned. This wasn't the tone anyone had expected. Reba's smile tightened just a little, just enough that if you were watching closely, you could see it. But she kept her composure. She was a professional, after all. "Well, Jon," she said, her voice still calm but with a tiny edge to it now. "Country music is about life, real life. It's about love and loss and heartbreak and healing. It's about family and faith and friendship. It's about the struggles that real people go through, the joys they experience, the dreams they chase. It's about real people going through real things, things that matter." Right, Stewart said, waving his hand dismissively. Real people? I get it. But isn't it all kind of the same? I mean, how many songs can you write about your dog dying or your girlfriend leaving you in a pickup truck? Now the audience was completely silent. This wasn't playful teasing. This was something else. Something mean. Reba took a breath. Jon, every song tells a different story. Every person who listens connects to something different. That's the beauty of music. Any music, whether it's country, rock, jazz, anything. Sure, Stewart said, but his tone made it clear he didn't agree at all. He was humoring her now, and everyone could tell. But come on, Reba, let's be real here for a second. You have to admit, country music is kind of, I don't know, simple? Compared to other genres, it's not exactly pushing boundaries, is it? It's not exactly innovative or challenging or asking the big questions. Reba's eyes narrowed slightly. Her professional smile was fading fast now, replaced by something more genuine, something more honest. Frustration. Simple? She repeated, her voice carrying more weight now. The sweetness was gone. Jon, have you ever actually listened to country music? I mean, really sat down and listened to it? Really paid attention to the lyrics, to the stories being told, to the emotions being expressed? Stewart shrugged, a careless gesture that spoke volumes. I mean, I've heard it. It's on in cabs sometimes or in restaurants. It all sounds pretty much the same to me, honestly. Twangy guitars, someone crying about something that happened in a small town, not really my thing. Not really anyone's thing who wants substance in their music. That last comment hung in the air like a bomb. The audience gasped. A few people actually said, out loud, no he didn't. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The tension in the room was thick now. You could cut it with a knife. You could feel it pressing down on everyone. This was no longer entertainment. This was uncomfortable. This was wrong. Reba sat up straighter in her chair, her posture shifting from relaxed guest to someone who was about to defend herself and everything she stood for. Well, Jon, she said, her voice firm but still controlled, still measured. Just because something isn't your thing doesn't mean it lacks value. Just because you personally don't connect with it doesn't mean millions of other people don't. Country music has some of the best storytelling in any genre of music, period. It connects with millions of people all over the world. It matters to them. It helps them through hard times. It celebrates the good times. It validates their experiences. And that matters. Does it though? Stewart asked, leaning forward now, really doubling down on his argument. His ego wouldn't let him back off. I mean, let's be really honest here. How much of country music is just nostalgia for a version of America that never really existed? All that stuff about small towns and simple values and the good old days. It's kind of, I don't know, regressive? Like you're all living in the past? The audience gasped. Some people actually gasped out loud. A few people even booed. Someone in the back shouted something that sounded like, "Come on, man," but it was hard to hear over the general noise of disapproval. Reba's face went red, but not from embarrassment, not from shame, from anger, from righteous, justified anger. Regressive? Reba said, her voice rising now, no longer bothering to hide her frustration. Regressive? Jon, those small towns you're so casually mocking, those are where real people live. Real, hardworking people. People who get up every single day and go to work and provide for their families. People who love their neighbors and help their communities. People who try to do the right thing every single day of their lives. And they deserve to have their stories told just as much as anyone living in a big city. Just as much as anyone else in this country. Stewart put his hands up in mock surrender, that infuriating smirk still on his face. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Easy now. I'm not mocking anyone. I'm really not. I'm just saying, maybe country music is a little stuck in the past. Like, when was the last time a country song actually said something new or interesting or relevant to the modern world? When was the last time you actually listened to one? Reba shot back, her voice sharp now, cutting through the tension like a blade. The audience erupted. They were on their feet now, or at least some of them were. They were clapping, cheering, shouting their support for Reba. Finally, someone was standing up to Stewart's condescension. Finally, someone was pushing back. The energy in the room had completely shifted. They weren't here to see a guest get torn down anymore. They were here to see someone defend themselves. And Reba was doing exactly that. Stewart laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. It was forced, uncomfortable, the laugh of someone who knows they've lost control but won't admit it. Okay, fair point. But come on, Reba. You have to see where I'm coming from here. Country music has a reputation. And let's just say it's not exactly known for being, progressive or forward thinking. And what reputation is that, John? Reba asked, her tone ice cold now, completely devoid of any warmth or friendliness. This was it. This was the moment where things were about to blow up completely. Stewart hesitated. For the first time in the entire interview, he looked uncertain. He knew he was in dangerous territory now. He knew he was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But his ego, his need to be right, his inability to admit he was wrong, it wouldn't let him back down. You know what I mean. Conservative, traditional. A little, shall we say, closed-minded? Not. Exactly embracing change or diversity or new ideas. The audience booed louder this time, much louder. Someone shouted something that couldn't quite be made out, but it definitely wasn't supportive of Stewart. Others were shaking their heads in disgust. This had gone too far, way too far. And then it happened. Reba stood up. She didn't storm off like someone throwing a tantrum. She didn't yell or scream or make a scene. She just stood, calm and dignified, her posture perfect, her head held high. She looked directly at Stewart with an expression that was equal parts disappointment and anger. And then she spoke. "John," she said, her voice steady and clear, cutting through all the noise. "I came here tonight to talk about my music, my career, my life. I was looking forward to having a genuine conversation. I didn't come here to be insulted. And I certainly didn't come here to have my fans, people who have supported me for over 40 years, insulted." Stewart's face changed. The smug expression disappeared, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "Wait, I'm not insulting anyone," he said quickly, his voice rising slightly. "I'm just, asking questions, having a conversation, playing devil's advocate. That's what I do." "No, John," Reba said firmly, cutting him off. "You're not having a conversation. You're being condescending. You're being dismissive. You're being disrespectful. There's a difference, a big difference. And you know it." The studio was absolutely silent now. Every single person was watching, waiting, holding their breath to see what would happen next. This was unprecedented. Guests didn't do this. Guests didn't call out hosts on their own shows. But Reba wasn't backing down. Stewart tried to laugh it off again, that nervous laugh that wasn't fooling anyone. "Come on, Reba, sit down, please. Let's move on to something else. Let's talk about your tour, your new album, anything. I didn't mean anything by it, really." But Reba wasn't moving. She stood there, looking at him with a mixture of disappointment, anger, and something else. Sadness, maybe. Sadness that someone with such a big platform would use it to tear people down instead of lifting them up. "You know what the problem is, John?" she said, her voice steady and strong, filled with conviction. "You think that because you have this platform, because you have this show, because people tune in to watch you every night, you think you can say whatever you want about whatever you want. You think you're smarter than everyone else. You think you're above it all. You think your opinion matters more than anyone else's, but you're not. You're not above anything. You're not better than the people you're mocking." "Reba, Stewart started, his voice weak now, uncertain. But she held up her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "I'm not finished," she said, her voice like steel. "Country music isn't perfect. I've never said it was. No genre is perfect. Every kind of music has its strengths and weaknesses. But the people who love it, the people who create it, the people who pour their hearts and souls into it, they deserve respect. They deserve to be treated with dignity. And if you can't give them that, if you can't show them even basic courtesy, then I don't need to be here. I won't be here." The audience erupted. They were on their feet now, all of them, clapping and cheering and shouting their support for Reba. Some people had tears in their eyes. They had just watched someone they admired stand up for herself, stand up for them, stand up for something that mattered. It was powerful. It was moving. It was exactly what needed to happen. The applause was deafening, echoing off the walls of the studio, drowning out everything else. Stewart looked panicked now, genuinely panicked. His face had gone pale. His hands were fidgeting. Wait, Reba, please. Come on, don't leave. Don't do this. We can talk about something else. We can move past this, please." But Reba was already taking off her microphone. She unclipped it carefully from her blazer, her movements deliberate and controlled. She handed it to one of the crew members who had rushed over, looking just as shocked as everyone else. The crew member took the microphone with shaking hands, not knowing what else to do. And then Reba started walking toward the side of the stage, her heels clicking on the floor with each step. Every eye in the studio followed her. "Reba!" Stewart called after her, his voice desperate now, but it was drowned out completely by the thunderous applause from the audience. They weren't clapping for him, they were clapping for her courage, for her dignity, for everything she represented in that moment. She stopped just before she reached the curtain and turned back to face him one last time. "You know, Jon," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I've been doing interviews for over 40 years. I've sat down with people who disagreed with me, who challenged me, who asked tough questions. And that's fine. That's part of the job. But I've never, not once, sat across from someone who was so determined to make me and my fans feel small. And I won't start now." And with that, she walked off the stage. The audience was still cheering. Some of them were even crying. They had just watched someone they admired stand up for herself and for them in the most powerful way possible. Stewart sat there at his desk, frozen. He looked out at the audience, then at the empty chair beside him, then back at the audience. He tried to smile, tried to make a joke, but nothing came out. Finally, he managed to say, "Well, we'll be right back after this break." But nobody was listening. The producers were scrambling, the crew was whispering, and the audience was still on their feet, still clapping for Reba. Backstage, Reba walked straight to her dressing room. Her manager was waiting, looking worried. "Are you okay?" he asked. Reba nodded. She was still angry, but she was also calm, resolved. "I'm fine," she said. I couldn't sit there and listen to that anymore. I couldn't." Her manager put a hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing. You stood up for yourself." She smiled, a real smile this time. "I stood up for all of us." Back in the studio, Stewart was trying to regain control. The show had cut to commercial, and when they came back, he looked directly into the camera. "So, as you probably noticed, Reba McEntire has left the building," he said, trying to sound casual. "We had a bit of a disagreement, and she decided to, make an exit." The audience didn't react. They just stared at him. He cleared his throat. "Look, I was just trying to have a conversation. You know how it is. Sometimes things get a little heated. It's all part of the process." Still, nothing from the audience. Stewart shifted uncomfortably. "Anyway, we have some other great guests coming up later in the show, so stick around." But the energy in the room was gone. Whatever magic a late-night talk show usually had, it was completely absent now. Stewart had killed it. In her dressing room, Reba was packing up her things. Someone from the show knocked on the door. "Come in," she said. It was one of the producers, a young woman who looked absolutely mortified. "Miss McEntire, I am so sorry about what happened out there. That was completely unprofessional, and we are going to address it." Reba nodded. "I appreciate that, but honestly, I'm just ready to leave." The producer nodded quickly. "Of course, we have a car waiting for you, and again, I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve that." "Thank you," Reba said softly. As she walked out of the studio and into the waiting car, Reba felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had done the right thing. She knew it. And judging by the way the audience had reacted, they knew it too. Meanwhile, back in the studio, the show continued, but it was a disaster. Stewart stumbled through the rest of the program, clearly rattled. His other guests picked up on the tension immediately. One of them, a comedian who was supposed to do a funny bit, even made a joke about the awkwardness. "Wow, tough crowd tonight," the comedian said, glancing at Stewart. "What happened? Did someone insult country music or something?" The audience laughed, but it was uncomfortable laughter. Everyone knew what had happened. Stewart forced a smile. "Yeah, something like that." When the show finally ended, Stewart went straight to his office. He didn't talk to anyone. He just closed the door and sat down at his desk, staring at the wall. He knew he had messed up. He knew he had crossed a line. But admitting it, that was a different story. A few minutes later, the executive producer knocked and walked in without waiting for a response. "Jon, we need to talk," she said, her voice serious. Stewart looked up. "What?" "What happened tonight was unacceptable," she said. "You disrespected a guest. You insulted an entire genre of music and everyone who loves it. And you did it on live television." Stewart sighed. "I was just trying to have a discussion. It got a little out of hand." "A little out of hand?" the producer repeated, her voice rising. "Jon, she walked off the show. That doesn't just happen." That's a nightmare for us. And it's all because you couldn't keep your opinions to yourself for 5 minutes. Stewart leaned back in his chair. So, what do you want me to do? Apologize? Yes, actually, the producer said. Publicly, tomorrow night, you need to own this. Stewart didn't say anything. He just sat there, looking frustrated. The producer shook her head. I'm serious, Jon. This is bad, really bad. And if you don't fix it, there are going to be consequences. She left without waiting for a response. Stewart sat alone in his office, thinking about what had just happened. He replayed the interview in his mind, hearing his own words, seeing the look on Reba's face. And for the first time, he felt a twinge of something he didn't experience very often: guilt. But even then, his pride wouldn't let him fully admit he was wrong. Instead, he told himself that Reba had overreacted, that she was being too sensitive, that it wasn't really his fault. Outside the studio, fans who had been in the audience were already talking about what they had witnessed. Some of them pulled out their phones and started recording videos, sharing their thoughts. I cannot believe what I just saw, one woman said into her camera. Jon Stewart was so disrespectful to Reba. She handled it like a queen, though. I have so much respect for her, another fan chimed in on social media. Reba McEntire just reminded everyone why she's a legend. She didn't let Jon Stewart talk down to her or her fans. That's class. The support for Reba was overwhelming. People who had been there, people who heard about it, people who just loved her music, they all rallied around her. It was clear that she had done more than just walk off a talk show. She had stood up for something bigger. She had stood up for respect, for dignity, for the idea that no one, no matter how famous or powerful, has the right to belittle others. And as Reba sat in the back of that car, driving away from the studio, she felt at peace. She didn't regret what she had done, not for a second, because sometimes walking away is the most powerful thing you can do. The next morning, the entertainment world was buzzing. News outlets were covering the story, social media was exploding, and everyone had an opinion. Most people sided with Reba. They praised her for standing her ground. They called her brave, strong, inspiring. But there were a few, a very vocal few, who defended Stewart. They said he was just doing his job, that he was known for asking tough questions, that Reba should have been able to handle it. But those voices were drowned out by the majority who saw the situation for what it really was. A host who had let his ego get the better of him, a guest who had been treated unfairly, and a moment that would be remembered for a long time. Reba didn't watch the news. She didn't scroll through social media. She already knew what people were saying, and it didn't matter. She had made her decision, and she stood by it. Instead, she spent the day doing what she always did, working. She had rehearsals, meetings, interviews with people who actually respected her. Life went on, but for Jon Stewart, things were different. He showed up to work that day to a very different atmosphere. The crew was quiet. The producers were tense. And when he walked into the writer's room, everyone stopped talking. "Morning," Stewart said, trying to sound casual. A few people mumbled responses, but no one made eye contact. One of the writers finally spoke up. "So, are we addressing last night on the show?" Stewart sighed. "I guess we have to." "What are you going to say?" another writer asked. Stewart shrugged. "I don't know yet. I'll figure it out." But deep down, he knew what he needed to say. He just didn't want to say it. That night, when the show started, Stewart walked out to a much more subdued audience than usual. They clapped, but it was polite, reserved. They were waiting to see what he would do. He sat down at his desk and looked directly into the camera. "So, I think we all know what happened last night. Reba McEntire was here, and things got a little tense. And I want to take a moment to address that." The audience was silent, listening. Look, I ask a lot of questions on this show. Sometimes they're tough questions. Sometimes they're uncomfortable questions. That's kind of what I do. But last night, I crossed a line. I was dismissive. I was condescending. And I made Reba and her fans feel disrespected. And for that, I apologize. The audience clapped, but it wasn't enthusiastic. It was more like, "Okay, we hear you, but we're not sure we can believe you." Stewart continued, "Country music has millions of fans. It's an important part of American culture. And just because it's not my personal taste doesn't mean it doesn't have value. I should have been more respectful, and I wasn't. So, Reba, if you're watching, I'm sorry." He moved on to the rest of the show, but the damage was done. The apology felt forced, like he was only saying it because he had to, not because he genuinely meant it. And people picked up on that. Reba never responded publicly to the apology. She didn't need to. Her actions had already spoken louder than any words ever could. And in the end, that was the real story. Not the clash itself, but what it represented. A moment where someone refused to be talked down to. A moment where respect mattered more than ratings. A moment that reminded everyone watching that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply say, "No, I'm not going to put up with this." Reba McEntire walked off that stage with her head held high, and she never looked back.